For the longest time, I wandered through gaming like a ghost, searching for a home that might not exist anymore. Games have consumed my life since childhood. World of Warcraft alone devoured years of it, back when MMOs still promised genuine worlds rather than hamster wheels dressed in fantasy costumes. But you remember what happened next. The mass exodus. Millions of us surveying what the genre had metastasized into and deciding, almost in unison, that we were finished. The grind had hollowed itself out entirely. Systems existed for their own perpetuation, rather than for anything resembling meaning. Dailies and weeklies and time gates. Architecture engineered to extract subscription revenue, rather than deliver experiences worth remembering. I walked away like countless others, and I never seriously entertained the thought of returning. Cyberpunk 2077 eventually found me, and I genuinely loved what it offered. But even as I sank hours into Night City, something remained conspicuously absent. A specific texture of experience I couldn't quite articulate, but recognized by its absence. What I craved was a world that breathed independently of my presence, that felt genuinely inhabited, whether my character walked its streets or not. Third-person perspective, because I wanted to witness my character existing within the space, rather than serving as a disembodied camera with attached weaponry. Open world, but not the theme park variety, engineered around content consumption metrics and map-clearing compulsions. Combat that felt like bodily expression, rather than mechanical routine. Animation that rendered characters as beings with weight and intention, rather than marionettes dancing on invisible strings. I kept sifting through Western releases, waiting for someone to construct this thing I couldn't stop imagining. The disappointments accumulated until I stopped registering them as disappointments. They became simply what gaming was now. And every Western open-world RPG I sampled seemed to suffer from the same underlying affliction, though articulating the diagnosis required years of accumulated frustration. The technical symptoms manifested with dispiriting consistency. Animation that telegraphed mechanical origin rather than organic life. Movement systems that made characters appear to glide across terrain rather than inhabit it. Combat that functioned with technical adequacy, mathematically sound, systemically coherent, yet felt indistinguishable from completing administrative paperwork while holding a sword. But there's something else. Something harder to name without sounding like I'm picking cultural fights I'd rather avoid. Western AAA has developed a peculiar relationship with beauty itself. Somewhere along the production pipeline, a decision gets made, consciously or through accumulated institutional habit, that conventional attractiveness signals shallowness, that aesthetic pleasure is somehow suspect, that characters must be rendered deliberately ordinary, aggressively plain, or actively unappealing to telegraph seriousness of artistic intent. Beauty becomes something to subvert rather than celebrate. The assumption seems to be that if you're enjoying how something looks, you must be missing deeper meaning. I'm not talking about diversity of body types or facial structures. That's representation, and representation has genuine value. I'm talking about a specific aesthetic posture that treats visual pleasure as embarrassment, as something to apologize for or undermine, as if the mere act of creating something genuinely beautiful would compromise artistic credibility. Compare character designs between Where Winds Meet and recent Western releases. The Chinese developers aren't embarrassed by beauty. They pursue it deliberately, in faces, in movement, in costume, in the way light catches form. The aesthetic philosophy assumes that visual pleasure and meaningful art coexist naturally, that humans are biologically calibrated to respond to beauty, and that this response deserves respect rather than deconstruction. Western design increasingly treats that same biological response as a problem to be solved, as naivety to be corrected, as unsophisticated taste requiring education toward more challenging aesthetics. The result? Worlds populated by characters I don't want to look at, executing animations I don't want to watch, inhabiting spaces designed to be admired for their technical achievement rather than experienced for their beauty. This isn't about demanding every character be a supermodel. It's about noticing that Western AAA has become aesthetically defensive, suspicious of its own capacity to create genuine visual pleasure, apologetic about the very idea that games might be beautiful, and that beauty might be the point. The last Western third-person RPG that genuinely moved me, it was Witcher 3, released almost 10 years ago now. Notably, a game unashamed of its own visual pleasures. And what happened behind the scenes tells part of this story. While Chinese developers invested that decade in accumulating institutional knowledge, compounding technical expertise, refining animation pipelines, mastering the peculiar demands of live service operation, Western AAA was hemorrhaging talent through perpetual restructuring cycles. But they were also accumulating a different kind of institutional knowledge, an aesthetic orthodoxy that treats beauty as politically suspect and visual pleasure as something requiring justification. The West was systematically forgetting how to construct what I wanted, precisely as developers elsewhere were learning to master it, and simultaneously convincing itself that what I wanted was unsophisticated to want. Then, almost by accident, I looked where I'd been told not to look, and found an island rising from waters I'd been warned were poisoned beyond redemption. In late 2025, I wandered into Where Winds Meet, carrying no expectations whatsoever, and something fundamental fractured inside my assumptions about what was possible and where possibility could originate. The quality so thoroughly exceeded what I'd been conditioned to anticipate that my initial response resembled a kind of vertigo. Once that disorientation subsided, curiosity flooded the space it vacated. If this existed here, what else had I been missing while trusting second-hand warnings? Wuthering Waves arrived next, and whatever remained of my preconceptions didn't merely crack, but shattered into irretrievable fragments. Then, Enfield confirmed what was rapidly becoming impossible to rationalize away. A single exceptional game might constitute coincidence, an anomaly explicable through unusual confluence of talent and circumstance. Two exceptional games suggest a pattern deserving serious investigation. Three games executing at this level of craft and ambition, that represents an entire paradigm developing in plain sight while I looked elsewhere. Let me render what I actually discovered. Wuthering Waves on PC delivers visual fidelity that rivals, and often even surpasses, releases positioning themselves as next-generation experiences. This wasn't mobile development grudgingly scaled upward. This was flagship ambition, constructed for serious machines by developers who comprehended what those machines could deliver. The Renashita sequence unfolded not as conventional cutscene or exposition delivery vehicle, but as genuine aesthetic experience demanding its own vocabulary. Camera movement that felt composed rather than merely functional, drifting through environments rendered with painterly sensitivity to how light inhabits space. Music that respired beneath the imagery rather than simply occupying silence. Symbolism woven through visual grammar, fate, beauty, humanity, loss. Thematic weight conveyed through pure compositional intelligence rather than explicatory dialogue. The species of artistic ambition I associate with auteur filmmakers operating at the apex of their powers, not with free-to-play productions of any geographic origin. Then one of the trial characters unlocked, and I encountered Lupa for the first time.
I will slay you!
Nothing in decades of gaming had equipped me for how she moved. Her spear doesn't swing through space, it writes. inscribing arcs through air with the deliberate grace of master calligraphy. Each strike flows into what follows not as mechanical combo, but as continuous linguistic expression. Sentences becoming paragraphs, becoming poetry, rendered through motion and precisely controlled violence. The controller pulsed against my palms, while my hands executed sequences faster than conscious deliberation could possibly track, rhythm colonizing my body, until the membrane separating player from performance dissolved entirely. Flow state achieved through combat, a phenomenon I'd encountered in theoretical discussions, but rarely experienced with such completeness. Somewhere within that encounter, suspended between one devastating arc and the next, a question surfaced that refused suppression. How does this exist as a gacha game? How does craft at this altitude inhabit a category I'd been systematically taught to dismiss as predatory mobile refuse? Where Winds Meet offered something texturally distinct, but equally transformative in accumulated impact. Where Wuthering Waves delivered adrenaline and kinetic beauty, Where Winds Meet provided something I struggle to name with anything less than the word sacred. A density of presence and historical gravity that transcended my previous understanding of what interactive media could convey. Moving through Qinghe and Kaifeng, bearing witness to the burning of Heaven's Pier, I ceased experiencing myself as a player executing quest parameters and began feeling like a witness to civilization unfolding in real time. Every street communicated habitation rather than level geometry. Lives that preceded my arrival and would persist beyond my departure. The world refused to feel engineered for my consumption. It felt like I'd been granted provisional entry into something that existed with full completeness, regardless of my presence within it. 3 games, 3 revelations, and somewhere in the accumulation, a recognition I couldn't suppress. The dream I'd been pursuing through years of Western disappointment hadn't materialized where I'd been conducting my search. It had quietly grown into reality, somewhere I'd been confidently assured was barren wasteland. And I'd nearly missed it entirely because I trusted cartographers who didn't know what they were surveying. The island proved real. But understanding my own discovery required understanding why so many Western players, and not just players, but the entire apparatus of Western gaming discourse, the IGN reviews, the Reddit threads, the Twitter takes, the YouTube critiques, the mainstream wisdom that shapes what gets attention and what gets dismissed, ricochet off these games entirely. Their rejection stems not from inferior discernment or willful blindness, but from deep training in a genuinely different evaluative grammar. They looked. They simply couldn't read what they were seeing. Traditional Western RPG values have calcified around specific markers of legitimate quality. Branching dialogue as proof of narrative depth. Systems complexity as signal of respect for player intelligence. Friction separating the committed from the casual. The formative experiences shaping this sensibility, Baldur's Gate, Morrowind, Dragon Age Origins, emerged 15, 20, 25 years ago. And somewhere along the way, that era crystallized into permanent definition rather than historical moment. Within this ossified framework, careful deliberation constitutes the essential pleasure. Struggle validates satisfaction. You earn the right to enjoyment through analytical effort and tactical persistence. When players formed by this tradition encounter stylish combat and cinematic spectacle, their cultivated instincts pattern match immediately toward a familiar dismissal. Shallow action gaming. Flash substituting for substance. Style deployed to distract from absent depth. The categorization feels self-evident, so the case closes before genuine examination begins. What presents itself as defense of standards reveals itself, upon inspection, as defense of familiarity. a definition of the RPG that ceased evolving 2 decades ago, while the medium itself continued forward. Western RPGs use dialogue to simulate choice, branching paths, moral calculations, consequence trees. These games use dialogue to simulate memory, atmospheric narration, character psychology, world texture layered through conversation. One grammar produces agency, the other produces presence. And for me, presence wins. The feeling of inhabiting a world that breathes, that remembers, that exists beyond my choices, that moves me more than any dialogue tree ever did. Animation performs narrative work in this language with a density Western design rarely attempts. How Lupa's spear travels through space communicates her identity before any dialogue establishes context. Arrogance encoded in specific flourishes. Discipline visible in her relationship to the weapon. Personality articulated through motion rather than exposition. Combat becomes choreography, something closer to dance than spreadsheet optimization. This isn't style over substance. This is style as substance. Form and meaning unified rather than opposed. This emphasis traces directly to wuxia philosophy embedded in Chinese cultural bedrock. The Jianghu isn't a landscape of static obstacles awaiting conquest through force. It's a domain of perpetual motion, where warriors articulate identity through how they move. For developers steeped in this tradition, animation isn't cosmetic polish. Animation constitutes meaning. Movement embodies character. The body in motion narrates the story. Western RPG traditionalists don't reject these games because they lack quality. They reject them because the games communicate through a language their formation never equipped them to comprehend. And rather than acquire new grammar, they dismiss what they cannot pass. But there's another layer of rejection beyond aesthetic grammar. One rooted not in what these games are, but in how they're funded. Why does this caliber of quality flourish here, while Western AAA delivers increasingly sophisticated emptiness? Why do Where Winds Meet and Wuthering Waves and Endfield possess the resources to animate how a character's weight shifts in mud, how fabric responds to motion, how light catches a blade mid-arc, while Western development struggles to render characters traversing flat terrain without betraying their algorithmic origins? The answer constitutes what I've come to call the unholy salvation. And I deploy that phrase with full awareness of its implications. Western AAA throws hundreds of millions at single projects, budgets that dwarf most Chinese productions. So how do these games achieve polish that Western releases consistently fail to deliver? There are many factors at play here: conversion efficiency, iteration density, institutional knowledge compounding over years of live service operation. I've explored the economics in another video if you're curious. But here, I want to focus on something more fundamental. A problem Western design refused to even acknowledge. How do you fund single-player quality at scale, continuously, without the $70 and abandon model? The Chinese answer was marriage. Single-player experience first, narrative depth, authored quests, crafted worlds. Live service funding second, ongoing revenue enabling ongoing investment. Where Winds Meet is a single-player RPG first, cosmetics and gacha for funding second, MMO elements third. The hybrid isn't compromise, it's architecture that lets single-player ambition survive past launch day. Western premium development never attempted this synthesis. At most, they offered DLC packs, new maps, expansion content, story editions sold months after launch. But these are afterthoughts, not architecture. The core game still operates on launch and abandon logic. Revenue collected at point of sale establishes a budget ceiling before a single line of code gets written. Revenue peaks at launch, which means cost pressure intensifies as release approaches. Every dollar allocated toward polish must justify its existence through projected revenue impact. And beauty, atmosphere, the granular qualities that render worlds genuinely inhabitable, prove maddeningly resistant to quantification on spreadsheets designed for shareholder reassurance. When budget compression arrives, and budget compression always arrives, cuts fall disproportionately on elements that don't demonstrably influence review aggregates or conversion metrics. Soul gets optimized out of the production. What survives is mechanical adequacy, impressive in isolated technical demonstration, hollow across accumulated experience. The live service hybrid restructures these incentives entirely. Revenue accrues over years rather than spiking at launch. Cost is amortized after release rather than compressed before it. Investment extends across the lifetime of operation. Within this framework, polish converts from cost center into retention engine. Beauty cultivates attachment. Attachment sustains engagement. Sustained engagement enables the funding that produces more beauty. The cycle reinforces itself. Western AAA is built for products. These games are built for worlds. Products optimize for launch performance, marketing optics, shareholder timelines. Worlds optimize for emotional habitation, long-term attachment, continuous becoming. The Gacha model isn't the cause of the beauty. It's the financial architecture that allowed beauty to survive and keep surviving. This is where Western gaming's old guard loses coherence entirely. Because embedded within Western discourse lies an equation so foundational it has become invisible. Monetization determines moral status, which in turn determines artistic legitimacy. If gacha mechanics qualify as predatory, and they are engineered around psychological manipulation, no honest analysis concludes otherwise, then games constructed atop gacha foundations must constitute soulless extraction schemes. The syllogism feels logically airtight. It also happens to shatter against observable reality. The games themselves demolish the reasoning through undeniable, uncomfortable quality. The craft is genuine. The beauty is real. The animation conveys intention and accumulated expertise that Western AAA has systematically forgotten how to achieve. The worlds possess weight and memory that $70 premium releases consistently fail to deliver. Whatever its funding mechanism, the art transcends origin in ways the monetization equals morality equation cannot metabolize. And this is the dangerous truth. The old guard doesn't reject these games because they're bad. They reject them because they're undeniably, disturbingly good. The quality itself constitutes the threat. Because if predatory monetization can produce genuine artistry, then the comfortable moral categories that organize Western gaming discourse collapse into incoherence. This is the unholy salvation in its full paradoxical weight. We are receiving the MMO 2.0 vision that seemed to perish when we abandoned original generation MMOs years ago. Living worlds dense with authentic presence and historical gravity. Combat achieving flow state through beauty rather than extorting mastery through accumulated suffering. Narratives that actually land with emotional consequence rather than distributing plot through exhaustive dialogue trees. Worlds engineered for sustained habitation rather than efficient completion. And every piece of it remains soul-bound to a slot machine. The gacha mechanics are present and operational. The psychological architecture is real and sophisticated. Anticipation constructed through meticulously calibrated animations. The golden flash, engineered to trigger precise dopamine cascades. The satisfaction of the pool, refined through years of research into human reward circuitry. FOMO cycles manufacture synthetic urgency around time-limited banners. Constellation systems demand duplicate acquisitions to maximize investments already made. The teeth embedded in these designs are genuine and sharp. What we're witnessing resembles, through strange 21st century optics, the resurrection of patronage as artistic funding model. High-spending individuals, the whales in industry vernacular, subsidize world-class aesthetic experiences that everyone else accesses without charge. It's a messy, algorithmic, late capitalist mutation of what the Medici once provided for Renaissance Florence. Concentrated wealth enabling beauty that benefits all who encounter it, independent of their personal economic participation. The beauty is real. The extraction is equally real. Both truths persist in uncomfortable coexistence without collapsing into comfortable resolution. Self-discipline makes the free-to-play path navigable. I pulled Augusta in wuthering waves through patience, not payment, banked resources across weeks, understood the pity mathematics, earned the reward rather than purchased it. With Where Winds Meet, I engage with Gacha only through free currency, and when I want to support the game, I buy cosmetics at fixed prices. No randomization, no manipulation, just direct transaction for something I want. The paths exist, but vigilance isn't optional here. It's survival requirement. This is the devil's bargain materialized as game design. World-class experiences funded by psychological machinery optimized for extraction. Neither clean nor simple. Neither easy to recommend without substantial caveat, nor honest to dismiss without acknowledging what dismissal forfeits. The alternative, though, waiting for Western AAA to rediscover how to construct worlds worth inhabiting, might mean waiting through an entire creative lifetime. The ghost might exhaust itself, wandering through increasingly polished emptiness, searching for a home that Western industry has structurally lost the capacity to build. You're not merely selecting a game when you engage with this choice. You're selecting which variety of compromise your conscience can accommodate. The mechanical competence of plastic Western souls, or the sublime artistry of experiences soul-bound to slot machines. So, we've finally arrived at the choice this entire exploration has been constructing toward. And I lack both authority and desire to make it on your behalf. What I can offer is clarification of what each path actually entails. The first trajectory proceeds through familiar terrain. Remain within Western gaming's boundaries and await the breakthrough that perpetually recedes toward an ever-retreating horizon. Maintain faith that the next Starfield, the next Veilguard, the next committee-approved sequel will finally materialize the world you've been imagining since you first grasped what this medium could become. Accept each disappointment as temporary setback, rather than structural symptom of an industry that has optimized away its capacity for genuine creation. The second trajectory demands acquiring fluency in an unfamiliar language, while remaining conscious that the textbook arrives bound in dangerous materials. It requires engaging with games funded through psychological architectures explicitly designed to separate you from money and attention, sustaining continuous awareness of how those architectures function, while simultaneously permitting yourself to experience the authentic beauty they've rendered possible. It demands holding contradictions without forcing premature synthesis, acknowledging manipulation while refusing to dismiss craft, appreciating artistry while never losing sight of its compromised foundations. No universally correct answer exists, because the variables resolve differently for each person encountering them. I can only offer testimony regarding my own choice and what that choice has meant for my relationship with gaming. I chose the island. The gold proved genuine when I finally held it. Combat the dissolved barriers between player and performance. Worlds that registered as memories rather than content delivery systems. Art funded through models I'll never fully trust, transcending those funding mechanisms through accumulated craft and coherent artistic intention. Everything I previously believed has collapsed into rubble, and the destruction feels more like liberation than devastation. The ghost that drifted for years through Western gaming's diminishing returns has finally located habitation deserving the name. If you've been engaging with these games while weathering dismissal from established Western gaming discourse, defending your preferences against accusations of subsidizing predatory systems, justifying hours invested in gacha trash to friends who lack the experience to understand what you found, know that you were right all along. The quantity is genuine. The craft is real. You weren't manipulated by flashy psychological tricks into accepting hollow spectacle. You recognized something that dismissive commentary couldn't perceive because it refused to actually look. If you've been avoiding these games based on inherited assumptions about what gacha signifies and what Chinese development produces, navigating by warnings issued by people who never genuinely explored the territory they cautioned against, you're missing experiences that might constitute exactly what you've been searching for in all the wrong locations. Not because I insist you'll love them, because the games speak for themselves when permitted to speak. Release the assumptions you've been carrying as protective equipment. Pick up a controller. Determine for yourself whether this particular bargain proves worth making. Games have never functioned as mere games. They're the worlds we elect to inhabit when the one we physically occupy fails to supply what we require from experience. They're the languages we choose to learn when we seek meaning through unfamiliar grammars. They're the bargains we negotiate with our time and attention, and sometimes our money. Ongoing transactions between what we desire and what we're prepared to accept in order to obtain it. Choose with wisdom. Choose with consciousness. Choose with full recognition of what each path extends and what each path extracts. The island awaits those willing to risk the crossing.